The wheat stalks bent under the weight of twin suns, their golden heads swaying in the dry wind that swept across Redstone's eastern fields. Walter Hayes pulled his hat lower over his eyes and wiped the sweat from his forehead with a dusty sleeve. The irrigation system had broken down again during the night, and he needed to check the damage before the afternoon heat made work impossible. He grabbed his toolbox from the back of his battered truck and started walking along the fence line. The red soil crunched under his boots with each step. This planet had earned its name honestly. Everything here wore shades of rust and clay, from the ground beneath his feet to the distant hills that marked the edge of his property. Walter had been farming this land for 3 years now. It was hard work, lonely work, but it was his. Back on Earth, people had looked at him like he was crazy for choosing frontier agriculture over comfortable city life. But Walter never fit well in crowds. He preferred the company of growing things and open sky. Something caught his eye near the eastern boundary. Dark marks scored the earth in long, gouging lines. Walter stopped walking and stared. Those were not animal tracks. The pattern was too deliberate, too violent. Something had crashed there. His hand moved instinctively to the plasma cutter on his belt. Not much of a weapon, but it was all he carried. Walter approached slowly, stepping over torn wheat and scattered debris. Metal fragments glinted in the sunlight, pieces of hull plating, broken instrumentation. The wreckage of a small shuttle lay crumpled against an outcropping of rock. Then he saw them. 2 massive shapes lay in the shadow of the wreckage. At first, Walter thought they might be dead, but then one of them moved just slightly, a tremor running through leathery wings. They were huge, each one easily the size of his truck. Scales covered their bodies in patterns of deep blue and bronze. Long necks ended in reptilian heads with closed eyes. Wings lay twisted at unnatural angles. Dragons, Walter had seen pictures in the colonial briefings. Rare species, mostly kept to themselves in distant sectors. He had never expected to see one, let alone 2, bleeding in his wheat field. The smaller one made a sound, a low, pained rumble that seemed to come from deep in its chest. Its wing was shattered, bone visible through torn membrane. Burns covered its left side. The scales blackened and cracked. The larger dragon beside it was worse. Deep gashes ran across its body, and one of its legs bent wrong. Walter should have walked away, should have called the authorities and let them handle it. These were aliens, creatures he knew nothing about. But as he stood there watching them struggle to breathe, he could not make himself turn around. Movement in the distance made his decision for him. Shapes circled in the sky to the south. Scavengers. Redstone had plenty of predators that could smell blood from kilometers away. These dragons would not last an hour exposed like this. Walter ran back to his truck and drove it as close as he could to the wreckage. He jumped out and started pulling equipment from the cargo bed. Rope, canvas tarps, metal poles from his fencing supplies. His mind raced through possibilities. The dragons were too big to lift, too heavy for his truck to carry, but maybe he could drag them. He worked quickly, tying together a makeshift sled from his plow attachments and reinforcing it with everything he could find. The smaller dragon watched him with one half-open eye. Walter met that gaze and saw intelligence there, understanding, fear. "I'm going to help you," Walter said, knowing the creature probably could not understand his words. "This is going to hurt, I'm sorry." He wrapped the first dragon as gently as he could in canvas to protect its wounds, then used every bit of rope he had to secure it to the sled. The creature made terrible sounds as he worked, but it did not fight him. The larger dragon was unconscious, which made the process easier but more frightening. Walter could not tell if it was dying. With both dragons secured, Walter hooked the sled to his truck and started driving. Slowly, so slowly. The sled dragged heavily through the dirt, leaving a wide trail behind them. Every bump and rock made Walter wince, imagining the pain it must cause his passengers. The barn was 2 kilometers away. Under normal circumstances, that was a 5-minute drive. Today it took Walter nearly an hour. He stopped every few minutes to check on the dragons, to make sure they were still breathing, to adjust the ropes that held them. Sweat poured down his face. His arms ached from gripping the steering wheel. The suns climbed higher, turning the air into a furnace, but Walter kept going. When he finally reached the barn, he was shaking with exhaustion. He unhitched the sled and used a mechanical winch to drag it inside into the cool darkness. The dragons lay still, too still. Walter ran for water and medical supplies, his hands fumbling with containers and bandages. As he knelt beside them, cleaning wounds and trying to stop bleeding with materials meant for livestock, Walter heard a new sound, a high-pitched beeping. It came from a device attached to the smaller dragon's harness, a beacon. Someone would come looking. Someone would find them. Walter looked at the two broken creatures he had just saved and realized he might have made everything worse. But as he met the smaller dragon's eyes again and saw gratitude there, he knew he would make the same choice every time. Outside, engines rumbled in the distance. Company was coming, and Walter had a feeling they would not be friendly. Darkness filled the barn when Walter opened his eyes. He had fallen asleep in the corner, slumped against a stack of grain bags. His back screamed in protest as he sat up. How long had he been out? An hour? 2. Both dragons were awake now. The smaller one had its head raised, watching him with eyes that reflected the dim light from the single overhead lamp. The larger dragon remained on its side, but its breathing was stronger than before. That was good. That meant it might survive. Walter stood slowly, keeping his movements calm and predictable. He had worked with enough injured animals to know that sudden motions led to panic. The smaller dragon tracked him as he walked to the water trough. Its neck tensed, muscles bunched under scales. "Easy," Walter said softly. "Just water, you need water." He filled a bucket and carried it toward them. The dragon made a clicking sound in its throat, not aggressive, more like a warning or a question. Walter set the bucket down within reach and backed away. The dragon watched him for a long moment, then lowered its head to drink. The sound of it lapping water filled the quiet barn. While it drank, Walter examined his medical work from earlier. The bandages were holding, though blood had seeped through in places. He would need to change them soon. The dragon's wing worried him most. The bones were clearly broken in multiple places. Without proper medical equipment, Walter had done his best with splints made from wooden boards and tape. It looked crude and probably painful. The larger dragon stirred. Its eyes opened slowly, confused and unfocused. It tried to lift its head and failed. A deep groan rumbled from its chest. The smaller dragon responded immediately with a series of clicks and low chirps. They were talking to each other. Walter grabbed a second bucket of water and approached the larger dragon. This one was more heavily built, with scars that suggested it had lived a long and difficult life. Its scales were darker, almost black in the dim light. When Walter knelt beside it, those ancient eyes fixed on him with such intensity that he almost backed away. But he did not. He held the bucket steady and waited. The dragon studied him for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly it dipped its head and drank. Over the next few hours, Walter established a routine. Water first, then food, though he had no idea what dragons ate. He offered them dried meat from his freezer and synthetic protein bars. The smaller dragon ate cautiously. The larger one refused everything. Communication was the biggest challenge. Walter tried words, but the dragons responded with sounds he could not interpret. Clicking, chirping, deep rumbles that vibrated through the floor. He tried hand gestures. The smaller dragon seemed to understand some of them. When Walter pointed to himself and said, "Walter," then pointed to the dragon with a questioning look, it made a complex series of sounds that might have been a name. Walter tried to repeat it and failed miserably. The dragon made a sound that could have been amusement. It tapped its chest with one clawed hand and made a simpler sound. "Rinna," close enough for Walter's human tongue. The larger dragon was Corva's. Walter learned this when Rinna managed to activate a damaged device on their harnesses. A holographic display flickered to life, showing images and symbols Walter did not recognize. But there were pictures. Rinna pointed to an image of two dragons and repeated their names until Walter understood. The holodisplay showed other things too: burning cities, ships firing weapons, dragons fleeing through smoke and fire. Rinna's claw moved across the images, telling a story Walter could only partly grasp. War, escape, pursuit, and then images of creatures that looked like the dragons but were marked with red symbols. Hunters. Walter's blood went cold. The beacon, someone was tracking them. As if summoned by his thoughts, the sound of engines grew louder outside. Walter killed the light and moved to the barn door, peering through a crack in the wood. 3 ships descended from the sky, landing in his field. They were small craft, sleek and armed, not military, not official. These were the kind of ships that belonged to people who made money from things the law frowned upon. Figures emerged from the ships. 6 of them, all armed, all wearing armor that suggested they expected trouble. They spread out and began scanning the area with handheld devices, looking for their prize. Walter's mind raced. The barn was not hidden. They would search it eventually. But maybe he could buy time. He pulled on his jacket and walked out to meet them before they reached the door. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Walter called out, making his voice casual and unconcerned. The leader turned, a tall alien with gray skin and too many eyes. "This your farm, human?" "It is, Walter Hayes. Is there a problem?" "We're tracking some cargo that crashed in this sector. 2 dragons, valuable cargo. You seen anything?" Walter shook his head. "Saw a ship go down this morning way past the eastern hills. Figured it was smugglers. I stay out of that business." The leader studied him. "You mind if we look around?" "I mind," Walter said calmly. "This is private property. You got official authority to be here." "We don't need authority." "Then I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I got work to do." The standoff lasted seconds that felt like hours. The other hunters had their hands on their weapons. Walter kept his hands visible and his expression neutral, even though his heart hammered in his chest. Behind him, the barn was silent. He prayed the dragons understood the need to stay quiet. Finally, the leader gestured to his crew. "Check the eastern sector. They couldn't have gone far with those injuries." The ships lifted off, heading in the direction Walter had indicated. He stood in his field and watched them go, knowing he had maybe bought a few hours, maybe less. When he returned to the barn, both dragons were watching him. Rinna's eyes held understanding. Corva's made a sound that needed no translation: gratitude. Walter knelt between them and started checking their bandages. "We need a better plan," he said quietly, "because they're coming back." 3 weeks passed like a strange dream. Walter's life transformed into something he never could have imagined. His days started before dawn and ended long after dark. Half his time went to maintaining the farm. The other half belonged to his unexpected guests. Rinna healed faster than Corva's. The younger dragon could sit up now, though flying remained impossible with that shattered wing. Walter had reinforced the splints twice already, using materials he ordered under the pretense of repairing farm equipment. Every night he worried that the bone was setting wrong, that Rinna would never fly again because of his amateur medicine. But Rinna did not seem worried. The dragon spent hours watching an old tablet Walter had provided, loaded with human language programs meant for colonist children. At first, Walter thought it was a long shot, but Rinna proved remarkably intelligent. Within days, the dragon was forming basic words. Within 2 weeks, simple sentences. "Water, please," Rinna would say, or "Thank you, Walter." Corvus remained silent but understood more than he let on. The older dragon's wounds were healing, but slowly. Walter suspected some internal damage he could not treat. Corvus spent most of his time resting, but his eyes tracked everything. Learning, evaluating, judging. On the 22nd day, Rinna surprised Walter by speaking an entire paragraph. "We are scholars, not warriors. The war came to our world uninvited. We fled because we wished to live, not because we feared death. Does that make us cowards in your culture?" Walter stopped cleaning equipment and looked at the dragon. "No, it makes you smart. Only fools confuse running from a lost fight with cowardice." Rinna's head tilted. "Your species fought many wars according to your historical files. You understand conflict." "Too well," Walter admitted. "That's why I came here, to get away from all that." "Yet you helped us. You placed yourself between us and hunters. You risked everything for strangers. Walter shrugged. You were hurt, couldn't just leave you there. Most would have, Rina gestured to Corvus. He was a teacher, philosophy and ancient history. I studied engineering. We know what the galaxy thinks of dragons. We have seen the way species react to our appearance. Fear, disgust. Even those who claim tolerance keep their distance. People fear what they don't understand. And humans, what do you fear? Walter thought about that. Lots of things, losing the farm, another bad harvest, being alone. He paused. Used to fear being seen as something I wasn't. Earth is classified as a death. World, other species look at humans and see predators, dangerous, aggressive. I got tired of being judged before anyone bothered to know me. Rina made a sound like a sigh. Then we are not so different. A mechanical rumble interrupted the moment. Walter's tablet was beeping, proximity alert. Someone was approaching the property. Walter moved to the window and swore under his breath. A truck was coming up the access road. He recognized it immediately. Griff, his nearest neighbor, lived 15 kilometers south. They were not exactly friends, but they helped each other when needed. Griff had been asking to borrow some equipment for weeks. Walter had been avoiding him. Stay quiet, Walter told the dragons, and stay out of sight. He met Griff outside, trying to position himself between his neighbor and the barn. Griff was a Tellarian, short and stocky with gray-green skin and 4 arms. He owned a smaller farm focused on root vegetables that seemed to thrive in Redstone's harsh soil. Walter finally caught you home. Griff hopped out of his truck, all 4 arms waving in greeting. Been trying to reach you for days, your comm broken. Been busy, lot of repairs to handle. Walter kept his voice casual. I bet, saw those hunter ships circling your sector couple weeks back. Any trouble? Nothing I couldn't handle. What do you need, Griff? Griff's expression shifted. His large eyes studied Walter with concern. You okay, Walter? You look terrible, lost weight, you sleeping? I'm fine. You're not fine, and your wheat looks neglected. Those eastern fields are weeks overdue for harvest. Griff moved closer, lowering his voice. What's going on? You in some kind of trouble? Walter wanted to brush him off, wanted to send Griff away with polite lies. But standing there, looking at the genuine worry on his neighbor's face, Walter realized how tired he was, how alone he had been carrying this secret. If I tell you something, Walter said slowly, I need your word you'll keep it to yourself. Griff's eyes widened. Of course, we're neighbors. Whatever it is, I'll help if I can. Walter glanced back at the barn, then made a decision that could change everything. Come with me, but Griff, I need you to trust me. What you're about to see, it's not what you think. He led Griff to the barn. His neighbor followed, confusion clear on his face. When Walter opened the door, revealing the 2 dragons. Resting inside, Griff froze. All 4 of his arms went rigid. His skin color shifted to a pale, frightened shade. Walter, Griff whispered, what have you done? I helped them, they were dying. Those are dragons. Do you know what dragons are worth on the black market? Do you know what those hunters will do to you if they find out? I know. Rina lifted her head. Please do not fear us. We mean no harm to you or Walter. Griff stumbled backward. It talks. She talks, Walter corrected. Her name is Rina, that's Corvus. Corvus raised his head slightly, acknowledgement in his ancient eyes. Griff stood there, breathing hard, looking between Walter and the dragons. Finally, he spoke in a shaky voice. You're insane, you know that. Probably. They'll kill you for this. Those hunters don't care about laws. I know that too. Griff was quiet for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, his color started returning to normal. Show me their injuries. If we're going to be insane together, we should at least do it properly. Walter felt something release in his chest. Relief, gratitude, thank you. Don't thank me yet. We still need to figure out how to keep all of us alive. Griff approached Rina cautiously. Can you tell me what happened to your wing? As Rina began explaining, Walter realized they had just crossed a line. The secret was no longer his alone to carry. For better or worse, they were in this together now. 2 months transformed Walter's farm into something that looked almost normal from the outside. The wheat grew tall and golden. Equipment ran smoothly. Harvest proceeded on schedule, but inside the barn, an impossible friendship was taking root. Corvus could walk now, not far and not without pain showing in his movements, but each day brought improvement. The old dragon spent mornings in the barn, but afternoons found him sitting in the shade of the equipment shed, watching Walter work the fields. Rinna's wing had healed enough that she could extend it fully. The membrane had regrown over the worst of the tears. Walter had removed the splints last week, holding his breath as Rinna carefully tested the limb. It was not perfect. There was a slight droop that would never fully correct, but Rinna could move it, and that was more than Walter had dared hope for. "Try this," Corvus called out one afternoon, his words now clear and deliberate. The older dragon had been practicing human speech for weeks. He approached Walter's broken harvester and studied it with the same intensity he probably once gave to ancient texts. "The power coupling is misaligned. Here." Corvus reached out with careful claws and made an adjustment Walter had been attempting for 3 days. The harvester hummed to life. Walter stared. "How did you know how to do that?" "Engineering principles are universal. The application changes, but the fundamentals remain constant." Corvus made another adjustment. "Your equipment is well maintained, but old. Many parts are compensating for failures in other systems." Over the next week, Corvus worked through every piece of machinery on the farm. Each one ran better than it had in years. Walter found himself harvesting twice as fast, with half the breakdowns. Rinna, meanwhile, had taken to following Walter through the fields. The young dragon would walk beside him, asking endless questions about agriculture. Why plant in rows? How did irrigation work? What made soil fertile? Walter found himself explaining concepts he had never put into words before. "It's about patience," Walter said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red. "Seeds don't grow on your schedule. You plant them, care for them, and trust that nature will do its part. Some years are good, some are terrible, but you keep planting because that's what growing things requires." Rinna absorbed this quietly. On our world we had gardens, not farms. We grew food, but it was considered an art form as much as a necessity. Each plant was placed with intention. Every garden told a story. "What story would this farm tell?" "Perseverance," Rinna said immediately. "And hope that something beautiful can grow in a harsh place if someone cares for it properly." The comment stayed with Walter long after Rinna returned to the barn. But peace could not last forever. The hunters returned with better equipment. Walter spotted their ships circling at high altitude, using advanced scanners that could probably detect life signs through buildings. He watched them from his porch, coffee growing cold in his hand. Griff arrived an hour later with news. "They've set up a base camp, 5 kilometers north of your property. They're not leaving this time." "How long before they search here?" "Days, maybe less." Griff's forearms gestured helplessly. "We need to move them, Walter. Get them." "Off-world." "Rinna can't fly yet. Corvus is still healing. Moving them now could kill them." "Staying here definitely will." Walter knew Griff was right. That night he sat down with both dragons and laid out their options. They could try to sneak them onto a transport ship. They could contact the authorities and hope for asylum. They could run and hide in the wilderness. None of the options were good. "There is another way," Corvus said quietly. "We surrender ourselves. You tell the hunters where we are, collect whatever reward they offer. At least then you would be safe." "No," Walter's voice was flat. "That's not happening." "Walter, we cannot ask you to sacrifice everything for us." "You're not asking, I'm choosing." Walter met Corvus's eyes. "Your family now, I don't abandon family." Rinna made a sound that was almost a sob. "In our culture, there is a word, kareth. It means the bond between those who choose each other, who commit to stand together regardless of blood or species. It is the highest form of kinship." "Then that's what we are," Walter said simply. "Kareth." The next morning brought a close call that nearly ended everything. A hunter ship descended without warning, landing in the North Field. Walter barely had time to hide the dragons in the underground storm shelter before armed figures approached the house. The search was thorough. They went through everything. Walter stood in his kitchen, hands visible, while strangers ransacked his home. They found nothing because there was nothing to find on the surface. But when one hunter approached the storm shelter door, Walter's heart stopped. "Check down there," the leader ordered. Walter spoke up. "That's just storage, canned goods and emergency supplies." "We'll see." The hunter pulled open the door, darkness below, silence. Walter held his breath. Then from the fields, an explosion. Everyone turned. One of the parked hunter ships had just erupted in flames. Griff had set off charges near the fuel tanks, creating a diversion at exactly the right moment. The hunters ran for their remaining ships. In the chaos, no one noticed Walter close the storm shelter door. When they were gone, he opened it again. Rinna and Corvus sat in the darkness below, absolutely silent. They had understood without words that any sound would mean death. That night, Griff joined them in the barn. His face was grim. "This can't continue there. Going to find them eventually." "I know. I made some calls, contacted a smuggler I know. He can get us transport off-world, but it's going to cost everything you have. The farm, your savings, all of it." Walter looked at Rinna and Corvus, at these two beings who had somehow become the most important thing in his life. "Set it up." "Walter," Rinna began. "No arguments. We're getting you somewhere safe, whatever it takes." But before Griff could make arrangements, everything changed. A new ship appeared in Redstone's orbit. Not hunters, not smugglers. This one transmitted official Galactic Coalition codes. Someone had reported the situation to the authorities. Walter's time had just run out. The Coalition ship landed at dawn, flanked by 2 escort fighters. Walter stood in his doorway and watched uniformed officers deploy across his property with military precision. There was no point in running, nowhere to go even if he tried. The officer in charge was human. That surprised Walter. She was tall, with short dark hair and eyes that had seen too much. Her uniform marked her as Commander Lena Rodriguez, Coalition Border Security. "Walter Hayes," her voice was professional but not unkind. "That's me. I'm here about the dragons. We have verified reports that you're harboring 2 fugitives from the Kestrin sector. Refugee status has not been granted to these individuals, which makes your actions illegal under Coalition law." Walter kept his hands visible and his voice calm. "They were dying. I helped them. Is that a crime?" "Harboring unregistered aliens is, yes, especially when those aliens are wanted by multiple parties." Lena pulled up a data pad. "The bounty on these 2 is substantial. You know, people are looking for them, people who don't follow laws or worry about collateral damage." "So what happens now?" "You surrender the dragons to my custody. They'll be processed and held pending investigation. You'll be charged with violating immigration protocols. Given the circumstances, you're probably looking at fines and probation. Could be worse." "And the dragons?" "That depends on a lot of things." Lena's expression softened slightly. "Look, I'm not the enemy here, but I have orders. Show me where they are." Walter had no choice. He led Lena to the barn. Her security team followed, weapons ready. When she saw Rinna and Corvus, her eyes widened slightly. Surprise or recognition, Walter could not tell. Corvus rose to his full height, which was impressive even with his injuries. "We will surrender peacefully. This human has done nothing wrong. Release him and we will go without resistance." "It doesn't work that way." Lena approached slowly, studying both dragons. "You're the scholars from Kestrin. I read the reports. Your people filed for asylum 6 months ago. And were denied." Corvus's voice held bitter resignation. "The Coalition does not welcome those fleeing civil war. We understand galactic politics." Rinna moved closer to Walter. "Please do not harm him. He saved our lives when anyone else would have let us die." Before Lena could respond, Griff arrived with half the farming community behind him. 20 trucks and haulers carrying settlers from across the region. They formed a line between the coalition forces and the barn. "What's going on here?" Lena demanded. A woman stepped forward. Her name was Bate, and she ran the biggest farm in the northern sector. "We heard you were taking the dragons. That's not happening, Commander." "This is a legal matter. Stand down." "This is our community. These dragons have helped us, fixed equipment, shared knowledge. They're not criminals." Bate gestured to the others. "Ask anyone here. The dragons have done nothing but try to help." Lena looked around at the assembled farmers. Tension filled the air. Her security team shifted nervously, outnumbered but better armed. "Everyone calm down," Lena said. "I'm just doing my job." "Your job is to protect people, right?" This came from another farmer. "Well, those dragons are people too. They're not weapons or criminals, they're refugees." A child pushed through the crowd. Young, maybe 8 years old, with the bright orange skin of the Velian species. She ran straight to the barn, ignoring Lena's shouted warning. The girl stopped in front of Rinna and held up her arm, showing a bandage. "You fixed me," the girl said. "When I fell and got hurt real bad, you made the pain stop." Walter remembered that day, a farming accident 2 weeks ago. The girl's arm had been crushed by machinery. Her parents were panicking. Rinna had moved faster than Walter thought possible, placing her claws on the injury. Whatever the dragon did, the girl stopped screaming. By the time medical help arrived, the worst damage had healed. Lena stared at the child. "The dragons have medical abilities." "Rinna does," Walter said. "She can accelerate healing in others. She saved that girl's life." Lena's expression changed. She pulled out her datapad and started scrolling through information, her fingers moving quickly. "This changes things. Medical capabilities beyond galactic standard, if they're willing to share that knowledge." She looked at Corvus. "There are laws, protections for beings with unique abilities that could benefit the Coalition." "We would share freely," Corvus said. "We have always believed knowledge should serve all, not just those who possess it." "Give me a few hours. I need to contact my superiors." Lena turned to her team. "Stand down, establish a perimeter, but no aggressive action." The farmers did not leave. They set up camp right there, making it clear they would not abandon the dragons. Someone brought food. Someone else started a fire. It became a strange gathering, farmers and coalition forces watching each other warily while children played nearby. Walter sat with Rinna and Corvus as the twin suns set. "I don't know what's going to happen." "Whatever comes, you gave us something precious," Rinna said. "Time, safety, hope, that is more than anyone else offered." Lena returned after dark, her face troubled. "I made calls, pulled strings. There's a chance. We can grant temporary asylum while we review their refugee status properly. But there's a problem." "What problem?" Walter asked. "Those hunters know you're here. They know the Coalition is involved. They're making a move tonight to grab the dragons before official protection can be established." Lena looked directly at Walter. "They're coming with everything they have, and they don't care who gets hurt." Griff swore. Bates started organizing the other farmers. Walter looked at his home, his fields, his life, and realized he was about to fight for all of it. "Then we need to be ready," Walter said, "because I'm not letting them take my family." They came at first light when the sky was still gray and the world was caught between night and day. 8 ships descended fast and hard, ignoring any pretense of subtlety. These were not scouts or search parties. This was an assault force. Walter stood on his porch with a plasma cutter in one hand and a farming tool in the other, knowing neither would be much use against military-grade weapons. But he would not hide while others fought for his home. The farmers had transformed the property overnight. Tractors formed barricades. Automated harvesters became mobile surveillance platforms. Bate had somehow rigged the irrigation system to create mud pits that would bog down ground vehicles. Griff had distributed every tool, weapon, and improvised defense they could gather. Lena's coalition forces took defensive positions around the barn. She had tried to evacuate the civilians, but no one would leave. This was their community. These were their friends. The hunters landed in the North Field, far enough to avoid immediate retaliation but close enough to press an attack. Figures emerged from the ships, heavily armed and armored. Walter counted at least 20, maybe more. Their leader used a loudspeaker. "Send out the dragons, do that and we leave peacefully. Refuse and people die, you have 5 minutes." Walter looked at Lena, she shook her head. "We hold, reinforcements are coming." "How long?" 20 minutes, maybe 30. The hunters would not wait that long. Walter could see them organizing for an assault. He moved to the barn where Rinna and Corvus waited, both dragons tense and ready. "This is wrong," Corvus said. "We should surrender, end this before anyone is hurt." "No," Walter's voice was firm. "We stand together." The first shot came at minute 4, a warning blast that vaporized one of the barricade tractors. The message was clear. The hunters meant business. Then the fighting started for real. Energy weapons lit up the dawn. Coalition forces returned fire with controlled bursts. The hunters pressed forward using their numerical advantage. They were professionals, coordinated and efficient. But they underestimated farmers who had spent years coaxing life from hostile soil. Bait triggered the irrigation system, turning the approach into a swamp. 2 hunter vehicles bogged down immediately. Griff deployed modified harvester drones that swarmed like angry insects, obscuring vision and disrupting communications. Walter ran between positions, coordinating defense. A blast hit near his feet and he rolled, coming up with his plasma cutter. He fired at a hunter who had breached the inner perimeter. The shot went wide but made the hunter take cover. The battle was chaos, noise and fire and fear. Walter saw Lena go down, hit in the shoulder. He dragged her to cover while coalition medics worked. She was cursing, trying to get back to the fight despite her injury. Then, everything changed. A hunter broke through, moving fast and targeting the barn with an explosive charge. Walter ran to intercept but knew he would not make it in time. The charge would breach the wall. The dragons would be exposed. Corvus emerged from the barn like ancient fury. The old dragon moved faster than Walter had seen since the crash. He put himself between the hunter and the explosive, his body a shield. The blast caught him full force. "No," Rinna's scream cut through the battle noise. Walter reached Corvus as the dragon fell. Blood covered the ancient scales, too much blood. The wounds were catastrophic. Walter pressed his hands against the worst of them, trying to stop the bleeding, knowing it was futile. Corvus's eyes found his. "Kareth," the dragon whispered, "family." Rinna was there, her claws glowing with that strange healing light. She pressed them against Corvus's wounds, pouring everything she had into saving him. But some injuries went too deep. The hunters pressed their advantage, seeing the dragons exposed. They moved in for the capture. That was when the coalition reinforcements arrived. 3 heavy cruisers dropped from orbit, flooding the farm with support troops. The hunters suddenly found themselves surrounded and outgunned. Their ships tried to lift off. 2 made it. 6 did not. The battle ended as suddenly as it began. Silence fell over the farm, broken only by the sound of people breathing, counting themselves alive. Walter stayed with Corvus while Rinna worked. Minutes passed. Then the old dragon's eyes opened. The healing light had done its work. Slowly, impossibly, Corvus sat up. "That hurt," Corvus said, which made Walter laugh and cry at the same time. The aftermath took days to sort through. The captured hunters faced serious charges. Lena's superiors, impressed by the community response, and the dragons demonstrated value, fast-tracked refugee status for Corvus and Rinna. More than that, they granted asylum to any other dragons seeking sanctuary. The story spread across galactic networks. A human farmer and 2 dragons, a community that stood together. The images captured that day showed something powerful. Different species working side by side, defending each other. 6 months later, Walter's farm looked different, expanded. 3 more dragons had arrived, refugees who had heard about the sanctuary on Redstone. The barn had been rebuilt bigger. fields. That once struggled now thrived with techniques that blended human agriculture and dragon wisdom. Rinna's wing had healed enough for short flights. She spent her mornings in the sky, testing her limits, growing stronger each day. Corvus worked with human engineers, sharing knowledge freely. His teaching days had returned, but now his students were both dragon and human. Walter still woke before dawn, still checked his fields and maintained his equipment. But now Rinna often walked beside him, discussing philosophy and farming with equal enthusiasm. Corvus would be waiting with repairs and improvements, making Walter's work easier. The authorities had offered Walter compensation for his troubles. He had refused. What he gained was worth more than money. On harvest day, as twin suns painted the sky in gold and red, Walter stood in his field surrounded by family. Not the family he was born into, but the one he chose. Human and dragon working together, building something new. A small child, one of the new dragon hatchlings, tumbled through the wheat stalks, chasing butterflies. Her mother watched nearby while helping load harvested grain. Laughter filled the air, a sound that belonged to no single species. Walter caught Rinna's eye. She smiled in the way dragons smile, with warmth in her ancient eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. Walter looked around at everything they had built together, at the community that had grown from one act of compassion, at the future taking root in Redstone's red soil. "Thank you," he replied, "for reminding me that home is not where you are from, it's who stands beside you." As the harvest continued and the day faded toward evening, three figures walked together toward the farmhouse. One human, two dragons, family in every way that mattered. And above them, more ships descended from orbit, more refugees seeking sanctuary, more family coming home.